I remember the exact moment the weather changed. It wasn't in the sky at first. It was in my chest. A certain pressure drop, a hollow metallic taste in the back of my throat, the kind you get before a thunderstorm breaks. The air in my life, which had been still and predictable for so long, suddenly felt charged, thick with a coming electricity I couldn't name. I was sitting at my desk, looking at a screen filled with numbers that had stopped making sense, in a job that had become a ghost of its former purpose, and I felt it. A shift. The first, distant rumble of the storm. And my first instinct, my very human instinct, was to complain. To look at the gathering clouds and curse the sky for its betrayal. To rail against the unfairness of it all. Why now? Why me? What did I do to deserve this weather? I want to tell you about the storm. Not as a concept, not as a nice little metaphor, but as a visceral physical thing that moved into the house of my life and refused to leave. It started small. A missed promotion that felt like a door slamming shut. Not just on a career, but on a future I had painted in such vivid colors in my mind. Then, a relationship that had been my anchor for years began to fray. The threads of it coming loose one quiet, painful conversation at a time. It was a slow leak, not an explosion. The kind of damage that doesn't announce itself with drama, but with a gradual sinking feeling. I'd lie awake at night and feel the walls of my own certainty cracking. The dreams I'd built, the person I thought I was. It all started to feel like a house of cards in a room where the windows had been left open. And then the real rain came. A phone call, a diagnosis, a loss. The kind of event that doesn't just change the landscape, it erases the map entirely. The wind picked up, howling through every crack in my foundation. It tore the shingles from my roof of confidence. It flooded the basement where I kept my oldest, most cherished memories. I was drowning in the noise of it. The frantic, desperate noise of trying to hold everything together. I was running through the gale, trying to nail boards over the windows, to sandbag the doors, but the water kept rising. It was a cold, relentless water, a chaos that soaked into my bones. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger with tired eyes, a man who was all reaction, no action, a man who was just trying to survive the next gust, the next wave. I was so busy bailing out the boat, I forgot I was supposed to be sailing it somewhere. I complained. Oh, how I complained. I was a poet of my own misery. I could list every injustice, every piece of bad luck, every cloud in the sky. I wore my pain like a badge of honor, but it was a heavy, sodden coat that was pulling me under. I'd meet friends for coffee, and my words would be of the storm. Can you believe this wind? Can you believe this rain? I was so focused on the ferocity of the weather. I became the weather. My identity became intertwined with the struggle. I was the man in the storm. And in a sick, twisted way, it was comfortable. It was an excuse. When you're in a storm, you're not expected to build anything. You're just expected to endure. And I was enduring, but I was decaying in the process. I was becoming waterlogged, my spirit softening, beginning to rot from the inside out. The turning point wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration. It was a moment of utter, complete exhaustion. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the scattered papers of a life I no longer recognized, the wind still screaming outside, and I just stopped. I had no more fight left, no more complaints. My voice was gone, and in that silence, that profound and terrifying silence, I heard a different sound. It was the sound of the storm itself, not as a monster, but as a fact. A powerful, impersonal, undeniable fact. And I realized I had a choice. I could keep shaking my fist at the clouds until the wind tore my arm from its socket, or I could finally go inside. Going inside. That was the first wise thing I did, though it didn't feel wise at all. It felt like surrender. It felt like giving up, but it wasn't. It was a strategic retreat. It was admitting that I couldn't control the storm. I could only control my response to it. And my response, until that point, had been to stand in the middle of it and get pummeled. So I went inside. I closed the metaphorical shutters. I lit a small candle in the darkness of my own spirit, and I looked around. The house was a wreck. Water stains on the ceiling, broken furniture, shattered glass on the floor. This was me. This was the interior landscape of my life. And for the first time, I stopped seeing it as a disaster zone and started seeing it as a workshop. This is what they don't tell you about the pause. The stillness. It's not empty. It's not wasted time. It is the most productive time you will ever have, if you have the courage to see it for what it is. When life feels paused, it's because the universe has handed you a chisel and a block of marble and said, "The sculpture is in there. Find it." The storm had forced a pause on the noisy, frantic, external life I was living. It had cleared the calendar of all the trivial appointments and forced me to make an appointment with myself. And let me tell you, that is the most terrifying meeting you will ever attend. The first tool I had to sharpen was my mind. My mindset was a blunt, rusty instrument. It was covered in the grime of other people's expectations, nicked and dented from years of hitting walls I had no business trying to climb. I had to learn to sharpen it. And sharpening a mind is painful. It involves friction. It involves scraping away all the dull assumptions, the limiting beliefs, the stories I told myself about what I could and couldn't do. I had to sit with my own thoughts, not as a judge, but as an observer. I had to notice the patterns, the way my mind would immediately leap to the worst-case scenario, the way it would magnify every minor setback into a cataclysm. I had to take that blade of my attention and patiently, slowly, drag it across the whetstone of silence, of meditation, of reading the words of those who had weathered their own storms. It was tedious work. There were no sparks, no dramatic flashes of light, just the quiet, repetitive scrape of reforming an edge, of learning to cut through the noise, both outside and within. I started to fix the leaks in my own thinking. I'd catch myself in a spiral of anxiety. "You'll never recover from this. I'm ruined." And I'd have to stop and gently, like patching a hole in a roof, apply a new thought. This is a season. It will pass. What can I learn from it? It felt stupid at first. It felt like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. But over time, the patches held. The internal weather began to calm. The winds of my anxiety still blew, but they no longer threatened to tear the house down. I had reinforced the structure. The second tool was my body. I had neglected it completely. It was just the vessel that carried my worried mind from one disaster to the next. I started small. A walk. Not a frantic problem-solving walk, but a slow, deliberate one. I would feel the ground beneath my feet. I would notice the cold air in my lungs. I would watch a bird on a branch, utterly unconcerned with my personal storm. This was my body. This was the machinery I'd been given to navigate the world, and I had been running it into the ground without any maintenance. So I started to maintain it, not with a punishing regimen, not with a burst of manic energy, but with a quiet, consistent care. Better food. That meant more sleep. Pong-a-dang. Simple movement. It was like oiling a rusty hinge. The squeaking stopped. The movement became smoother. I was, piece by piece, reassembling the instrument of myself. And the third and most difficult tool was my spirit, my heart. It was a shattered compass, spinning wildly, pointing nowhere. To rebuild it, I had to go into the quiet. I had to listen for the whispers beneath the howl of the storm. I started a journal, not a diary of events, but a logbook of feelings, a map of my own interior. I wrote down my fears, my shames, my small secret hopes that felt too fragile to speak aloud. I wrote about the person I used to be, and the person I wanted to become. And in the writing, I began to find patterns. I began to see that my values had been buried under a landslide of shoulds and have-tos. I had been chasing a version of success that wasn't mine. The storm had wiped that slate clean. It had given me a terrifying, but ultimately liberating, blank page. This quiet work, this rebuilding in the stillness, is invisible. Nobody throws you a parade for getting a good night's sleep. Nobody gives you a trophy for journaling for 30 days straight. There are no external rewards for sharpening your tools. It is a private revolution. It happens in the dark, in the quiet, in the small, stubborn choices you make when no one is watching. You are alone with your chisel and your marble. And the only sound is the tap, tap, tap of your own will. Slowly, painstakingly, freeing the form from the stone. I remember days when the silence was deafening. Days when the urge to run back out into the storm, to feel the familiar sting of the rain, was almost overwhelming. The drama of the storm is addictive. It makes you feel alive, even if it's a painful, frantic aliveness. The stillness feels like death in comparison. But it's not death. It's gestation. It's the quiet of the seed deep in the soil, of the caterpillar in the chrysalis. All the real work, the transformation, happens in the dark. The explosion of the flower, the flight of the butterfly, that's just the reveal. The work was done in the silence. I learned to find progress in the stillness. Progress wasn't a promotion or a new relationship. Progress was the ability to sit with a difficult emotion without being consumed by it. Progress was waking up without a knot of dread in my stomach. Progress was the simple act of preparing a healthy meal for myself, an act of profound self-respect. Progress was the patience to read a book all the way through, to regain the ability to focus on something other than my own anxiety. These were small victories, microscopic in the grand scheme of things, but they were mine. They were real. They were the bricks I was using to rebuild my foundation, one by one. And then, one day, I noticed it. The light was different. I was at my window, and I realized the rain had stopped. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. It had just tapered off. The wind had died down to a breeze. The storm wasn't gone. The ground was still soaked. The trees were still bent. The evidence of its passage was everywhere. But the active fury was over. The sky was still gray, but it was a soft, high gray, not a threatening, low one. The storm had cleared, and I was different. I wasn't the same man who had cursed the first drops of rain. I had spent the season of the storm not just huddling for cover, but working. I had sharpened my mind until it was a keen blade, capable of cutting through confusion. I had repaired my body until it was a strong, reliable vessel. I had rebuilt my spirit until it was a true compass, pointing toward a north of my own choosing. I had a new set of tools. I had a new map. Tight. When I finally stepped outside, the world was washed clean. It smelled of damp earth and possibility. And I didn't rush. I didn't sprint for the horizon, desperate to make up for lost time. That was the old me. The frantic, reactive me. I walked. I took a deep breath. I looked at the wreckage, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt a calm sense of purpose. I knew how to rebuild. I had been practicing in the quiet, and this is the secret, the one the storm taught me. Those who keep working in the silence, who use the pause to prepare, don't just rebuild what was lost. They build something new, something stronger, something designed for deeper waters. When the storm clears, they don't just patch their old boat and push it back into the same shallow harbor. They build a new ship, one with a deeper keel and stronger sails. A ship designed to sail farther than they ever dreamed possible. I launched my boat on that calm gray morning. It wasn't a grand spectacle. It was a quiet, solitary event. But as I caught the wind, I felt a power I had never known. It wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of survival. It was the calm, confident power preparation. Every oar I pulled was smooth. because my arms were strong from the work in the stillness. Every course I charted was true, because my mind was clear from the sharpening. Every decision I made was aligned, because my spirit was grounded from the rebuilding. I looked back at the shore, at the people who were still shaking their fists at the sky, still complaining about the storm that had passed, still trying to bail out their leaking, broken-down boats. And I felt not superiority, but a deep, aching compassion. I had been there. I understood, but I also knew I could never go back. The silence had changed me. The work had transformed me. I sailed on, and I am sailing still. The waters are not always calm. There are new squalls, new challenges, but I am no longer afraid of the weather. I respect it. I prepare for it. When the winds pick up, I don't complain. I simply adjust my sails, trust my tools, and remember the profound truth I learned in the heart of the storm. That even in the most profound stillness, there is a furious, beautiful, unstoppable progress happening. It is the progress of the seed in the dark earth, of the metal on the whetstone, of the soul in the quiet workshop of its own becoming. So if you are in the storm right now, if the wind is screaming and the rain is horizontal, and you are cold and tired and afraid, I am not going to tell you it will be easy. It won't. I am not going to tell you to look on the bright side. Sometimes there isn't one. But I will tell you this. And I want you to hear it not as a platitude, but as a truth whispered from someone who has been there, sitting on the floor with no fight left. Go inside. It feels like surrender, but it is your first act of war against the chaos. Close the shutters, light a candle, and look at the tools you have. They are there. They may be blunt, they may be rusty, but they are there. Start with the one closest to you. Maybe it's just your breath. Sharpen it. Take one deep conscious breath. That is progress. Maybe it's your body. Fix it. Drink a glass of water. Stretch for 1 minute. That is a rebuild. Do not worry about the noise outside. Let it rage. Your job is not to stop the storm. Your job is to use the time it gives you. The pause is your greatest asset. It is the universe's gift of a blank slate, a quiet workshop, a sacred space for you to become the person you need to be for the journey ahead. Do the work in the silence. Do it when no one is watching, when there are no accolades, when it feels pointless. Sharpen your mind, mend your body, rebuild your spirit. Tap, tap, tap at the marble of your own potential. It is in there. I promise you, it is in there. And when the storm clears, as it always does, you will not just be a survivor. You will be a sailor. You will step into your new ship, feel the solid deck beneath your feet, the well-honed tools in your hands, and you will set a course for a horizon you once thought was just a dream. You will sail farther than anyone else, not because you are luckier, but because you were wiser. You didn't just endure the storm. You let it teach you. You let the silence transform you. And now, you are ready for the open ocean.